Imagine you're standing inside a palace. The floors are cold marble. The candles flicker outside. An empire stretches across continents, across oceans, across mountains, across entire worlds that most people in Europe had never even seen. And yet inside this palace, behind closed doors, a king sits with a secret, a child. A child who carries his blood but will never wear his crown, a child who will grow up in silence, trained to disappear. This is not a fairy tale. This is the story of Spain. For centuries, the Spanish monarchy produced some of the most powerful rulers the world has ever seen, kings who controlled more land than any ruler before them, kings who sent ships to the Americas, who funded explorers, who commanded armies that made empires tremble. But behind all of that power, behind all of that gold and glory, there were shadows, there were whispers, there were children born in the wrong bed, in the wrong moment, to the wrong woman, and yet carrying the right blood. Today, we are going to talk about those children. We are going to talk about the secret heirs of Spain, the ones history almost forgot, the ones the kings tried to hide, and the ones who, despite everything, changed the story of an empire forever. Let us start at the beginning. Let us go back to a time when Spain was not yet Spain. In the late 1400s, the Iberian Peninsula was a patchwork of kingdoms: Castile, Aragon, Navarre, Portugal, each with its own king, its own rules, its own ambitions. And then something remarkable happened. Two young royals fell in love, or at least agreed to marry. Their names were Ferdinand and Isabella. She was Queen of Castile. He was heir to Aragon. Together, they would become the most famous royal couple in Spanish history. Together, they would send Columbus across the ocean. Together, they would expel the Moors from Granada. Together, they would build the foundation of what we now call Spain. But Ferdinand had a secret before he married Isabella. Before he was the great Catholic king, before all of that glory, Ferdinand was a young man with desires. And young men with desires, especially royal ones, sometimes create consequences they cannot undo. Ferdinand had at least two illegitimate children before his marriage to Isabella. His son Alfonso of Aragon would later become the Archbishop of Zaragoza, one of the most powerful church positions in Spain. Think about that for a moment. A king's secret son, born outside of marriage, rising to lead one of the most important religious institutions in the country. That is not a small thing. That is a story all by itself. And Ferdinand did not stop there, even during his marriage to Isabella, the great queen. The woman history remembers as his equal, Ferdinand continued to have affairs. He fathered more illegitimate children. He acknowledged some of them. He gave them titles, positions, power. He folded them into the edges of the court, close enough to benefit from his name, but far enough to never threaten his legitimate heirs. This was not unusual. In fact, for a Spanish king, it was almost expected. Here is something important to understand about royal Europe in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. Legitimacy was everything. The word legitimate came from the Latin word for law. A legitimate child was a lawful child, a child born inside a proper Christian marriage, recognized by the church, recognized by the state, recognized by everyone. That child had rights. That child could inherit. An illegitimate child called a bastard, a word that was not always as harsh as it sounds today. Simply a child born outside of marriage, that child had far fewer rights. In most circumstances, they could not inherit a throne. They could not claim a title. They were, in the eyes of the law, almost invisible. But here is the complicated truth. Invisible does not mean powerless. Illegitimate children of kings grew up knowing who their father was. They grew up in courts. Sometimes they received education. They received money. They sometimes received enormous amounts of both. And because they were the children of kings, people around them never fully forgot whose blood they carried. That blood was a kind of invisible crown, one they could never openly wear, but one that everyone could see. Let us jump forward now. Let us talk about the king who, more than almost anyone else, personified the power and the tragedy of secret heirs. Let us talk about Charles I of Spain, the man the rest of Europe knew as Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. Charles was born in 1500 in the city of Ghent, in what is now Belgium. He was the grandson of Ferdinand and Isabella. He inherited not just Spain, but the Netherlands, Austria, parts of Italy, and eventually the title of Holy Roman Emperor. He was, for a time, the most powerful man on earth. He controlled more territory than any ruler since ancient Rome. He was also a man with a very complicated family life. Charles's wife was Isabella of Portugal. She was devoted to him. She was beautiful. She gave him legitimate heirs, including the future Philip II of Spain. By all accounts, it was a genuinely loving marriage, which was rare for royal unions of the time. But Charles was often away. For years at a time, he was off fighting wars against the French, against the Ottomans, against Protestant German princes. He crossed the Alps multiple times. He sailed back and forth across the Mediterranean. He lived in campaign tents and borrowed palaces. And in those long stretches of absence in foreign cities, in unfamiliar beds, Charles fathered children. His most famous illegitimate son was a boy named John. We know him as Don John of Austria, and Don John of Austria is one of the most extraordinary figures in the entire history of Spain. Don John was born around 1547. His mother was a woman named Barbara Blomberg, a German woman from Regensburg. Charles met her during his time in Germany, and whatever happened between them left behind a consequence: a child, a secret child. For years, this child's identity was hidden. He was raised by a Spanish nobleman, kept quiet, kept comfortable, but kept out of sight. His royal father never officially acknowledged him during his lifetime. Charles died in 1558 without ever publicly claiming this boy as his son. But here is where the story gets extraordinary. When Charles died, he left instructions, written instructions. In his will, he told his legitimate son, the new King Philip II, about this boy. He told Philip that this child was his half-brother. He asked Philip to take care of him, to acknowledge him, to give him a place. Philip II did something remarkable. He obeyed. Philip II, by most accounts, was a cold and careful king. He was deeply religious, deeply suspicious, deeply committed to control. He did not do things carelessly. And yet, when he read his father's dying wish, he took this illegitimate half-brother into his court, gave him the name Don John of Austria, educated him like a prince, and eventually gave him command of armies. Don John of Austria became one of the greatest military commanders of the 16th century. He was brilliant, brave, charismatic, everything Philip II was not in terms of personality. And in 1571, he commanded the Christian fleet at the Battle of Lepanto, one of the most important naval battles in history. The combined forces of Spain, Venice, and the Papal States faced the Ottoman Empire on the waters of the Gulf of Patras. The Ottomans had been expanding across the Mediterranean for decades. They seemed unstoppable. Don John stopped them. The Battle of Lepanto was a thunderous Christian victory. It shattered the myth of Ottoman naval invincibility. Don John became a hero across Europe. Miguel de Cervantes, the author of Don Quixote, fought in that battle and called it the greatest event in history. All because an emperor had a secret son in Germany. And that secret son grew up to command fleets. But Don John is only one chapter in this story. Let us keep going. Philip II of Spain, the cold, careful, deeply religious king who acknowledged his half-brother, had his own complications. He was married 4 times. He had legitimate heirs. He had the machinery of succession carefully laid out, and yet the shadows of illegitimacy followed the Spanish court through his reign and long after it. Let us talk about something even more complicated. Let us talk about what happened when secret heirs stopped being just court gossip and started becoming political weapons. By the 17th century, Spain was in slow decline. The empire that had seemed invincible under Charles V and Philip II was beginning to crack. The economy was struggling. The wars were endless and expensive. The royal family itself was suffering from something nobody wanted to talk about openly: the consequences of too many generations of marriages between close relatives. The Spanish Habsburgs, the royal family of Spain, had been marrying their cousins for generations. Sometimes literally their cousins, sometimes first cousins. They did this to keep power within the family, to maintain alliances, to prevent outside claims on the throne. But there is a biological price for that kind of careful, closed circle of marriage. That price is genetic disorders. That price is children born with health problems. That price is, eventually, children who cannot survive at all. The last Spanish Habsburg king was Charles II. He is one of the most tragic figures in European royal history. Charles II was born in 1661. His parents were King Philip IV and his niece Mariana of Austria. Yes, his niece. His father married his own niece. Charles II was the product of generations of close inbreeding, and it showed in devastating ways. He walked with difficulty. He could barely chew food because of his enlarged jaw, the famous Habsburg jaw, which by his generation had become almost grotesque. He suffered from epilepsy. He was mentally impaired. He was called El Hechizado, the bewitched, because people thought demons had cursed him, not understanding that what had actually cursed him was his own family tree. Charles II had two wives. Neither marriage produced a child. He could not father an heir. And so, an empire that had once stretched across half the globe sat waiting for a childless, dying king to determine who would come next. Now here is where secret heirs became less about romance and more about war. Because Charles II had no children, everyone in Europe started arguing about who should inherit Spain. There were multiple claimants. France had a claim through marriage connections. Austria had a claim through the Habsburg bloodline. Even England and the Dutch Republic had opinions, because whoever inherited Spain would inherit its colonies, its gold, its armies, and that would completely reshape the balance of power in Europe. Charles II himself was tormented by the question. His court was divided into French and Austrian factions, each trying to influence the dying king. He changed his will multiple times. He prayed. He reportedly allowed priests to perform exorcisms on him, trying to drive out whatever curse was preventing him from producing an heir. In the end, just before his death in 1700, Charles II signed a will leaving everything to Philip, Duke of Anjou, a French prince, grandson of Louis XIV of France. He chose France. The rest of Europe refused to accept this quietly. The result was the War of the Spanish Succession, one of the largest conflicts of the 18th century. It dragged in England, the Dutch Republic, Austria, Portugal, and half a dozen other states. It lasted over a decade. It killed hundreds of thousands of people. It reshaped the map of Europe, all because a king had no legitimate heir. All because centuries of careful closed marriages had ended in a man who could not produce a child at all. This is the other side of the story of secret heirs. Not just the sons and daughters kept in shadows, but the emptiness left behind when the official line runs out. Let us go back to the shadows, though, because the story does not end with the Habsburgs. When the Bourbon Dynasty took over in Spain, the French line brought in by that final Habsburg will, they brought their own habits with them. And one of those habits was the same one that Ferdinand of Aragon had practiced 3 centuries earlier. The habit of having children in places other than the official royal bed. Philip V, the first Bourbon king of Spain, was known for his intense and turbulent personality. He suffered from deep depression, possibly bipolar disorder. He was devoted to his wives in an almost obsessive way. Historians describe him as needing to be physically near his queen at almost all times, but his reign was also full of court intrigue, full of whispers about who held real power behind the scenes. His son, Ferdinand VI, had no children at all. Another childless king, another crisis of succession. Then came Charles III, who is generally considered the most capable of the Spanish Bourbon kings. He was a genuine reformer. He modernized the government, expelled the Jesuits from Spain and its colonies, tried to rationalize the economy. He was a good king by the standards of the time. But good kings still had secrets. The real explosion of secret heirs in Spanish history, the moment when illegitimacy stopped being a court whisper and became an open political crisis, came in the 19th century. And it came through a figure who is still controversial today. His name was Manuel Godoy. Manuel Godoy was not a king, he was a royal favorite. He was a young officer from a modest, noble family who rose with extraordinary speed to become the most powerful man in Spain, not because of his birth, but because of his relationship with the royal family. King Charles IV of Spain was a weak king, famously dominated by his wife, Queen Maria Luisa of Parma. Maria Luisa was the real power in the marriage. She was strong-willed, politically active, and according to the gossip of the entire European continent, deeply in love with Manuel Godoy. Godoy became Prime Minister of Spain at the age of 25. He became a duke. He became Prince of the Peace after negotiating a treaty with France. He was given titles, palaces, wealth beyond imagination. And the rumors about why he had all of this were everywhere. People said the Queen had made him powerful because she loved him. People said that some of the royal children were his, not the king's. The court painter Francisco Goya painted Godoy, painted Maria Luisa, painted Charles IV. Goya was famous for painting what he saw rather than what people wanted him to see. His portrait of the royal family is one of the most fascinating paintings in Spanish history. Historians and art critics have long noted how the king appears weak and vague, while the queen stands proud and dominant. Goya also painted his famous Naked Maja, widely believed to have been commissioned by Godoy and widely believed to portray one of his lovers. Were there secret royal children during this period? The whispers said yes. History cannot fully confirm it, but the whispers were loud enough and the political damage was real enough that they contributed to one of the most dramatic political collapses in Spanish history. When Napoleon swept through Europe, he used the scandal of the Spanish court, the weakness of Charles IV, the dominance of Godoy, the rumors of illegitimacy as justification for his invasion. He invited the Spanish royal family to Bayonne in France, essentially under false pretenses, and forced both Charles IV and his son Ferdinand VII to abdicate. He then placed his own brother, Joseph Bonaparte, on the Spanish throne. Spain erupted in resistance. The Peninsular War began. The people of Spain, who had been humiliated by their own royal family scandals and weakness, found new strength fighting against a foreign invader. This is the war that gave us the word guerrilla. Little war, because Spanish fighters used exactly that kind of tactics against Napoleon's enormous army. But even after Napoleon was defeated, even after Ferdinand VII came back to the Spanish throne, the questions of legitimacy did not go away. If anything, they got worse. Ferdinand VII was not a good man. He was not a good king. He was cruel, inconsistent, and politically erratic. He abolished the Constitution, restored absolute monarchy, executed liberals, and generally made himself hated by large portions of his own country. He also had a problem. He had been married 3 times by his late 40s, and he still had no male heir. His only children were 2 daughters, Isabella and Luisa Fernanda, under a law called the Salic Law, which the Bourbons had brought from France. Women could not inherit the Spanish throne. Ferdinand's brother, Don Carlos, was the expected heir. But Ferdinand, in one of the last major political acts of his life, changed the succession laws to allow his daughter Isabella to inherit. This was called the Pragmatic Sanction. Don Carlos refused to accept this. He claimed the throne for himself based on the old law. His supporters became known as Carlists. And so began the Carlist Wars, a series of brutal civil conflicts that tore Spain apart through much of the 19th century. On one side, the supporters of young Queen Isabella II, a girl on the throne. On the other side, the Carlists fighting for a different branch of the royal family. The Carlist Wars were not just about who was the rightful king. They were about everything Spain was fighting over in the 19th century: tradition versus reform, church power versus liberal government, old ways versus new ones. But at the heart of it was a question of legitimate succession. Who had the right to rule? Whose bloodline was real? And into this chaos, the old questions about secret heirs became newly dangerous. Isabella II herself deserves a moment of our time. She became queen as a child. She was declared of age at 13. She was married off at 16 to a man she despised, her cousin Francisco de Assis, who was widely believed to be gay and who showed almost no interest in his young wife. Isabella II was not a faithful wife. She could hardly be blamed. Her marriage was a political transaction. She had been given to a man who wanted nothing from her. She found warmth, companionship, and love elsewhere. The question of who fathered her children, including her son, the future Alfonso XII, was whispered across Spain and across Europe for generations. Her son Alfonso was eventually accepted as the legitimate heir, and he would restore the Bourbon monarchy after a Republican interlude. But the whispers followed him. The whispers followed his mother. And those whispers weakened the monarchy in the eyes of many Spanish people at exactly the moment when monarchies all across Europe were being challenged. Isabella II was eventually deposed in 1868 in a military coup. She went into exile in France. Her abdication did not end the chaos. Spain went through a republic, a foreign king from Italy, another republic, and finally the restoration of the Bourbons under her son Alfonso XII, all within a few chaotic years. By the 20th century, the question of secret heirs had taken on a new dimension entirely. The last king of Spain before the Civil War was Alfonso XIII, great-great-great-grandson of that same troubled lineage stretching back through Isabella II, back through the Carlists, back through the Bourbons, back eventually to the last Habsburgs and their sterile, tragic end. Alfonso XIII had legitimate children. He had a queen, Victoria Eugenia, a granddaughter of Queen Victoria of England. They had children together. But some of their children were hemophiliacs, the same genetic condition that had spread through the royal families of Europe from Queen Victoria's bloodline. Alfonso XIII also, by the conventions of his time and his class, had relationships outside his marriage. He acknowledged at least two illegitimate children, Rodrigo de Silva y Menendez and another son named also Alfonso. Alfonso XIII's reign ended in 1931 when, rather than face a civil war over his rule, he chose to leave Spain voluntarily. He did not formally abdicate. He simply left. He told his government that he was stepping aside to avoid bloodshed. He went into exile. He died in Rome in 1941, never returning to Spain. His legitimate heirs continued the dynasty in exile through extraordinary drama. A son who died in a car accident, another son who renounced the succession, eventually a grandson named Juan Carlos, who would, after decades of dictatorship under Francisco Franco, become King of Spain in 1975 and lead the country to democracy. Juan Carlos I is a story that brings all of these threads together in a modern and deeply human way. He was the heir who nobody expected to actually become king. Franco had brought him to Spain as a young boy, educated him, shaped him, intended to use him as a tool to preserve the authoritarian system after his own death. Juan Carlos played along. He kept his mouth shut. He watched, he learned, and when Franco died in 1975 and Juan Carlos was suddenly king, he surprised nearly everyone. Instead of continuing Franco's dictatorship, Juan Carlos oversaw a transition to democracy. He supported the writing of a new constitution. He helped dismantle the authoritarian system that had been in place for 40 years. In 1981, when a group of military officers attempted a coup, literally storming the parliament with guns, Juan Carlos went on national TV and ordered the army to stand down. The coup collapsed. The democracy survived. For a generation, Juan Carlos was a hero. But then came the scandals. In his later years, Juan Carlos became associated with financial irregularities, hunting trips paid for by foreign powers, money hidden in foreign bank accounts, allegations of corruption that shocked a Spain still suffering from economic crisis. He abdicated in 2014 in favor of his son Felipe VI. And then, even in abdication, the revelations kept coming. In 2020, he left Spain again, moving to Abu Dhabi as Spanish prosecutors investigated him for financial crimes. And through all of this, the question arose again. The old familiar question, the one that had followed Spanish kings for 500 years. Were there other children? Were there secret heirs? In 2014, a Belgian woman named Ingrid Sartiau filed a lawsuit claiming to be the biological daughter of Juan Carlos I. A German man named Albert Sola also claimed paternity. The Spanish courts dismissed the cases, ruling that the king had a form of legal immunity. But the claims themselves made international news, the old story once more in a new century. So what do we make of all this? What does it mean that the Spanish monarchy, this institution that shaped half the world, that sent ships to the Americas and built an empire on which the sun never set, had running through its entire history, this river of hidden children, secret heirs, unacknowledged blood? It means something very human. Something that no amount of power, no amount of gold, no amount of divine right could change. Kings were men, and men, even men who ruled empires, even men who commanded armies and owned continents, even men who kneeled before God in private chapels every morning and genuinely believed they had been chosen by heaven. Those men were still capable of love, of desire, of weakness, of the very human tendency to create lives they had not planned for. The secret heirs of Spain are not just footnotes. Don John of Austria won a battle that changed the course of Western history. The Carlist Wars over the question of legitimate succession killed tens of thousands of people. The scandals around Isabella II helped bring down a monarchy. The questions around Juan Carlos I are still being settled in courts today. But more than that, more than the politics and the battles and the legal proceedings, the secret heirs of Spain remind us of something important. They remind us that the official history, the one carved in stone on palaces and printed in textbooks, is never the whole story. Somewhere in the shadows, there are always other lives, other children, other stories that the powerful would rather not tell. There is one more thing worth saying before we close this story. The Spanish monarchy still exists today. Felipe VI sits on the throne. His daughter Leonor is Princess of Asturias, the official heir. Spain is a constitutional monarchy now. The king has no real political power, only symbolic importance. He cannot start wars or expel people or change succession laws by royal decree. The days of secret heirs changing the fate of empires are in that sense over, but human nature does not change with constitutions. The question of who kings really are, not just the official version, not just the portrait hanging in the throne room, but the actual human being behind the crown, has never gone away. And as long as there are powerful people with secrets, as long as there are children born in complicated circumstances, as long as the gap between the official story and the real one exists, someone will always be asking the question: did Spanish kings have secret heirs? The answer, woven through 500 years of history, from Ferdinand of Aragon's acknowledged bastard sons to the lawsuits filed against Juan Carlos I in the 21st century, is yes. Yes, they did. And those heirs, those children born in the wrong moment to the wrong woman under the wrong star, helped shape everything. They fought battles, they built cathedrals, they started wars, they ended wars, they whispered in courts and commanded fleets and grew up in silence and burst onto the stage of history when nobody expected it. They were, in the end, exactly what their fathers were. Human beings, complicated, brilliant, flawed, ambitious human beings, carrying blood that no law could erase and no silence could fully contain. The empire had its golden ships and its silver mountains and its armies and its priests, but it also had its shadows, and in those shadows lives were lived, children were born, and the real history was quietly made. That is the story of the secret heirs of Spain. If this video moved you, if it surprised you, if it made you think differently about the kings and crowns we learned about in school, share it. Because history is never just the official version. It is always richer, darker, stranger, and more human than anyone in power wanted you to know. Thank you for watching.